Yeah, the topic is how do children handle the pain? It's amazing, how children handle pain very, very differently from adults, because it's not that they feel less, but because they don't have the language yet, because they haven't matured in their thinking, in their nervous system, or any of those processes that we have developed internally as adults. Children don't have that yet. Children take good 21 years to become adults, and another 21 years to become more matured adults. So it's a long process. So most of the childhood, the pain that children feel is embodied. It's like in their body. They live through their body. Their behavior shows it. And somewhere, that faculties of imagination is high in the second stage of development. So pain is also kind of imagined. The rhythm that we create will either support the pain relief or increase the pain. So, uh, before they can truly articulate the pain, it begins to be lived in their body. And children like cannot speak that, I'm feeling abandoned, I'm feeling emotionally unsafe, I'm not present, I'm overwhelmed. They can't say that, but it becomes through their behaviors. It's um, they sulk, they withdraw, they slow down, but we adults don't see it. We are still pushing, we are still saying they can do it. We still say that they need to be understanding the adults to help them align and get ready, move quickly, things like that. So children make it dramatic, because it's like, we call out somebody's name, they don't respond, my volume increases, they don't respond, then I eventually shout, something like that, where eventually children begin to cry. And when you ask them why, they maybe do not know why they're crying. They may become a little aggressive, show it on their younger siblings, show it on their pets, or on the food that they don't want to eat, or they don't want to eat certain food. They start, these look like stubbornness, dramas that they create, but that is how they are trying to express what they're unable to express through words. So they could withdraw, they could be disobedient, um, they may not want to play with certain friends, they don't want certain friends to come home, so there is emotional withdrawal also. uh, you know Before child begins to adapt to the pain, they put forth these behavior changes. Somewhere they are internally trying to settle down into a system where they feel safe, where they feel loved, where they see adults being steady, where they don't need to perform to get appreciation from parents or adults. you know but once they try it enough times, they cry enough times, they tell you enough times, but then we have our own belief system, we have our own ways of doing things, so we may not listen, hear, observe the child. That is when they embody it. They kind of take it into their body. It comes to the body last. So when it comes to the body, it's more like they do have stomach aches, they do have headaches, you know they do have constipation, some things like this. You begin to see they don't sleep well, there's bedwetting, there are nightmares, sometimes skin issues. Children are always tired, they don't want to do things, or they could also be super hyper. You could see, if you scan through the entire body from head to toe and kind of understand what each of when pain in each of the body looks like, child may have it. Their external aggression, internal withdrawal, all of that, body begins to speak when the child cannot yet explain. you know like 5-year old cannot tell you that when my parents fight they scare me. They cannot say it, but they tell it in other way. They start crying. If they see parents fighting, they start crying. That's how they're trying to tell. It's not like they're disturbing us. I mean, if I'm fighting with my spouse and my child starts crying, I might find child to be disturbing me or not getting through with my spouse. So I say, go to your room, sit and study, look at something. This is not something you have to be worried about. And I continue my fight and I push the child away. Then the child may wake up next morning with a stomach ache. And then it's like, what did you eat last night? I told you to not eat that ice cream. Won't work, right? They've embodied that pain. You know, child, we have seen they are part of my environment. Just like how I carried my child in my womb, they're part of my physical body. Now they become part of my physical environment. So what I do affects them. They regulate themselves based on how I regulate myself. Right? So if adults are anxious, or they're emotionally absent, they're unpredictable, that's the most dangerous way of parents, to be unpredictable. I don't know. I mean, child will be always anxious if I'm unpredictable. Will she be happy? Will she be sad? Will she cry? Will she break up? Whatever. So my body, the child's body, is always vigilant, looking for the clues. Is she, even listening to the footsteps? Is she walking, thumping inside the room, or is she gentle about it? Now, if she's gentle, then I don't trust her either, because there may be a storm brewing behind, right? So the child is stuck in that fight back, or withdraw, or freeze. Fight, flight, freeze, those are the states our mind automatically goes into. So now the child has to survive. They cannot go off on their own, so they have to live with us no matter how we are. So they develop to be these good children. Don't talk too much, become responsible, make tea for my mother when she's upset at anybody, but I feel responsible as a child, and I want to kind of make up the situations. So I start contributing. If I go back into my own childhood, some examples will reveal to us as to how we started measuring up, behaving like an adult. When I was still a kid, I had to be playful, I had to fight, I had to run around, I had to do so many other things. But I became a responsible child, and I was appreciated for it. They said, oh, she just understands, she's so obedient, she does what without even telling. And that's like a recognition that I get from my parents or from my teachers, right? So I numb that pain. It becomes part of my breathing, part of my moving, part of my sleeping. Everywhere you got to adjust, everywhere you got to give in, everywhere you cannot raise your voice becomes my personality. There is this fear in my gestures, fear in my postures. There is insecurity in my movement. In my talk. There is a grief in my play, and I'm confused. But I still look good. I mean, as long as I'm good, parents really don't worry about it. So being good need not always necessarily be a positive trait. I need to begin observing. Where is my child showing it up? Usually they do it in the games that they play. They may be. I had one child in my school. He always drew his father lying on the floor. I mean, he would do a stick figure on the floor, and every time that was the thing. And one time I found out that this child, when he was like 3.5 or 4, lost their father, and he remembers their father body on the floor of their house. That's the memory he carries, and that's the pain he was hiding. But you could see it in pictures. It's not that child forgot. Many times when parents pass away, when the children are young, parents try to not expose their children, they take them away. And there is this, where is my father now? Where is my mother now? She was there yesterday. Now we tell she's gone to grandmother's house and she's gone out, she'll come back. She never comes back. Then there is constant fear that gets stuck in the body to not trust that somebody who lives may never come back. Somewhere you will also see children protecting the pain for their parents. I don't want my parents to feel bad, so I keep it to myself. I depend on these adults, so I adapt. So you see, overly performing children, overly caretaking children, or overly invisible children also, or overly angry children also, both sides. They could be overly performing, introverts trying to balance, taking too much responsibility, and some children being super defiant, not cared, disconnected. Both are pain responses. So you will begin to see it through their play, um, observe them, and eventually, if I go back to my childhood and I start working on my own beliefs and experiences, I will realize, oh, I have been carrying this pain for so long. It's been there since my childhood. Now, where did that come from? Is something I need to go back. Understanding me is helping me to go back and try not to create that kind of pain for my child. So, the greatest protection against this pain is not about me becoming perfect, it's about me being present, me being connected to my child. Somewhere I need to ask, when the child is not behaving properly or not according to my expectations, instead of telling what's wrong with my child, that's a blanket statement. So go into details a little bit. What might this behavior of this child is protecting in the child? What pain are they protecting, hiding, unable to express? What has child adapted to? They try to express, we didn't understand, then they adapt, and then it shows up in the body. So any of these gives us an indication as to what pain the child may be going through, though they don't have language yet. I need to develop that. I need to understand the movements of the child, the behavior of the child, and look at my own behavior in the house as to how something could have led to the pain in the child. So, such questioning myself as to what is it that I'm creating or I'm not observing will help the child not carry that pain for their whole life. So look at child being stubborn, maybe lazy, maybe stubborn, maybe clingy, maybe aggressive. Any of these are indications to go back and ask myself, where is that I need to change so my child does not feel the pain in the environment I have created for the child. Right? So remember, children are extremely, extraordinarily adaptive. They try their bit, but then they adapt. So sometimes the ones who carry the most pain may not be the loud ones. They may be the ones who learned very early on that I should not be burdened to anybody. And then that carries for the whole life. So begin pondering over it and see what best you can change in the environment around you for the children to not carry the pain but to relieve it. Thank you.